I'm Pam from the Hooked on Sewing blog. In this video tutorial, I'd like to teach you how to make a pillowcase with a contrast cuff and trim using the burrito method. Now don't be intimidated, it's really easy to make and I'm going to walk you through every step along the way. Let's talk about what you need to make one standard size pillowcase with a contrast cuff, this is what I'm talking about, and some trim. So for your main fabric, you're going to need 3/4 yard of fabric, and this is what I've chosen for my main fabric. And you'll want to cut that 42 inches wide. So 42 inches wide, we'll need to trim this down to 42 inches in width and 23 inches long. So this is the fabric that I've chosen for the main piece of my pillowcase. And then we will also need 1/4 yard of fabric for the cuff. And now for the cuff, we're going to end up cutting it 42 inches wide by 9 inches in height. Now my fabric for the cuff has a directional design on it, so I'm going to need to pay attention to that when I attach it to my pillowcase. And then for the trim, you need about 1/8 yard, but really we only need a 2-inch strip of fabric that's 42 inches wide. So 42 inches wide by a 2-inch piece for the trim that's going to go for this little piece that's going to go on our pillowcase. Okay, besides the fabric, let's talk about some tools and other supplies that you'll need. Of course, you'll need some coordinating thread. I like to use this Gutermann brand all-purpose thread and a bobbin that I've already wound with some of this thread. I may also need some pins, and I really like to use my Wonder Clips. You'll also need a cutting mat like I'm using here, an acrylic ruler, and a rotary cutter if you're using the self-healing cutting mat. And of course, you'll need some way to cut your fabric if you're not using the rotary cutter. I really like these stainless scissors from Fiskars, but you need a nice pair of fabric scissors. I also like to keep handy a little pair of embroidery scissors that I keep right by my sewing machine so I can trim any little threads or clip curves, but I like to keep these handy at the sewing machine. So that's really all we need besides our sewing machine. And you'll need just a standard or zigzag foot for your sewing machine, and let's get started.
So the first thing that I'm going to do is to take my fabric, fold it in half, then fold it in half again, and I'm just going to trim up the edges so they're all nice and even. I'll line up the folded edges of the fabric and then use my acrylic ruler and rotary cutter on my self-healing mat to trim up those edges. And then next I'm going to take the cuff piece and lay it face up on my surface. And then I will take the main fabric piece of the pillowcase and I will lay it on top of the cuff and pin or clip those in place. And then I'll take the trim and fold it in half and press it lengthwise. Once I have the trim pressed, I'll line up the raw edges on top of the main piece of the pillowcase. Clip all that together, and then I'm going to roll up the bottom edge of the pillowcase towards the top and then fold over the cuff and pin or repin that in place. And then I'll simply take it over to my sewing machine and sew a 1/4-inch seam across the raw edges. Now I'll do a back stitch at the beginning and the end to secure my stitches. Again, keep the edges nice and even and lined up and stitch a 1/4-inch seam allowance across the top raw edges of the cuff. This will attach the cuff to the main fabric and the trim all together. Again, I like to use these Wonder Clips because they're just so easy to use and remove, and you don't poke yourself, and they hold many layers of fabric together really nicely. Once I have that sewn, I'll trim the threads, and then I'm ready to turn it right side out. I'll just simply pull the pillowcase through one of the end openings in the cuff. There you go. Just keep pulling until you have it all the way out of the cuff. And then you're going to take it over to your ironing board and press that. I like to press it from the top first. Press the seam nice and flat. And then turn it over and press the back of the cuff so that the seam is nice and flat on that side too. And just keep pressing until I have the cuff nice and flat and the seam pressed flat, just the way that I like it. And then I'll go back over the front of it again just to make sure I have everything nice and smooth. And if I have any, like the cuff here on one end is a little bit wider than the main fabric, I'll go ahead and trim that off at this point too. Then line up my edges and use my clips to line up the side and the bottom of the pillowcase. Once I have that all pinned or clipped in place, I'll take it to my sewing machine and use a 1/4 inch stitch to sew along the side and across the bottom. Be sure to secure your stitches, doing a back stitch at the beginning and the end of your stitches. Rotate at the corner and stitch across the bottom of the pillowcase. Now you can also zigzag stitch or finish these raw edges. I'm going to use my serger to overcast these seams along the side and the bottom of my pillowcase. Now the serger is going to leave these nice long threads, serged threads at the beginning and the end of each of my stitching lines. And I'm going to take a needle and thread in the end of the thread for the serge threads, and I'm going to feed them back through the stitches, and this will just help to secure those stitches so they don't come unraveled. Just like that, and then trim off the thread. And then I'll do the same thing at the bottom at the pillowcase where I have the threads down there. Again, take the loose ends of the serge thread, thread it through my needle, and then just feed it through the stitches and trim off the excess. And then once I've done that, I'm ready to turn my pillowcase right side out. And there you have it. I'll take my pillowcase over to my ironing board and iron it again, but there you have your pillowcase. You can make this pillowcase longer if you want by increasing the size of the main fabric. So I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. If you liked it, be sure to like the video below, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and come visit me over on Hooked on Sewing. Thank you.